Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Sleep-Deprived Teen. Why Our Teenagers Are So Tired and How Parents and Schools Can Help Them Thrive. By Lisa L. Lewis, M.S. Narrated by Samantha, Desz. Publisher's Note: this audiobook may refer to visual elements included in the print and ebook editions of the book. Additionally, this audiobook includes many references to exercises. Please have a piece of paper with a pen or pencil or a note-taking device available. The information provided in this book is based on the research, insights, and experiences of the author. Every effort has been made to provide accurate and up-to-date information. However, neither the author nor the publisher warrants the information provided is free of factual error. This book is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any medical condition or disease, nor is it intended as a substitute for professional medical care. All matters regarding your health should be supervised by a qualified healthcare professional. The author and publisher disclaim all liability for any adverse effects arising out of or relating to the use or application of the information or advice provided in this book. Forward. There are times when one person can spark a tremendous change. One such spark is the story of how Lisa L. Lewis helped improve the sleep health of millions of kids. For over 20 years, I was aware of the increasing data that our adolescents were systematically being sleep-deprived by society, and that the school system was one of the biggest drivers of this problem. I could recite the literature that stated that delaying school start times would improve the health of our children. I spoke about it many times over my career. But even after having spoken at several schools, I too had grown cynical that we could make a change. Although the audience was always interested in the information, they inevitably would politely say they were powerless to make any changes, or that the science did not apply to their communities. You can imagine how surprised I was to learn that a bill had been introduced in my adopted home state of California by State Senator Anthony Portantino to delay school start times to help adolescents get more sleep. I was even more surprised when I learned that he introduced the bill after reading a commentary Lisa had written, Why School Should Start Later in the Day, which ran in the Los Angeles Times in September 2016. One of the many facts that resonated with him was how sleep deprivation can be a factor in suicidal behavior, given that a close family member of his had died by suicide. That state bill, which called for the public high schools and junior high schools in California to implement healthier starting times, was quickly defeated in Sacramento. But the spark was lit. Senator Portantino vowed to work through the legislative process to reintroduce the bill. The second time around, the bill made it out of the legislature only to be vetoed by the governor. Undeterred, and with a growing coalition of supporters and increasing scientific data, he introduced the bill for a third time. We worked together throughout the journey as part of a collective effort by a small, dedicated group of volunteers, including Joy Wake and others in Sacramento, who regularly called on legislators to share the peer-reviewed research and other updates. In 2019, our efforts culminated in California being the first state in the nation to pass a law of this scope protecting adolescent sleep health. No fundraising was ever done in support of this bill, and it was up against some of the most powerful lobbyists in the state. Indeed, many political experts expected the bill to be defeated. But science won out. In my practice, I've seen countless teens over the years whose sleep issues are hindering their health and well-being. With this book, parents now have a clear, accessible guide about the importance of sleep health for their adolescents and the far-reaching ramifications it can have. Rafael Pelayo, MD, FAASM, Clinical Professor, Sleep Medicine Division, Stanford University School of Medicine. Introduction. Is your teen well-rested? If you're listening to this, chances are the answer is no. That's stressful for both of you, And as a parent of teens, I know it's not easily solved by saying, go to bed. I'd like to point out that you're not alone. Unfortunately, this sleep-deprived scenario has become the norm. In 2007, when the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, first added teen sleep to its National Youth Risk Behavior Survey, only 31% of high schoolers said they got at least 8 hours of sleep on school nights. By 2019, that was down to 22%. In fact, 8 hours is the minimum amount they need. The National Sleep Foundation recommends that 14 to 17-year-olds get 8 to 10 hours a night. This drops to the adult range of 7 to 9 hours at age 18. Teens themselves know their sleep falls far short of this. As Jessica Leahy recounts in The Addiction Inoculation, her 2020 book about preventing teenage substance abuse, when I tell adolescents how much sleep they are supposed to get, they laugh. Whole auditoriums full of middle and high school kids just throw their heads back and laugh. Their message is clear. Teens get nowhere near enough sleep. Not only does teen sleep loss have important implications for substance abuse, as Leahy discusses in her book, it's worrisome for a number of other reasons. Sleep-deprived teens are more likely to engage in risky behaviors and be anxious, depressed, or suicidal. At school, their grades are affected, and they're absent or tardy more often. Sleepy athletes have a greater risk of injury, and drowsy teen drivers are more likely to crash. The changed sleep rhythms of adolescents are a driving factor, but there are also societal ones. Teenagers are overloaded, strapped for time, and often asked to wake far earlier than they should because of school start times. It's no surprise they're sleep-deprived as a result, with far-reaching consequences. They're dragging themselves through their days, which begin far too early and don't end until late in the evening. And then the alarm rings at the crack of dawn, and they do it all over again. This issue hit my radar when my son entered high school in the fall of 2015. As he struggled to wake up each morning to get to class by 7:30 a.m. and came home exhausted every afternoon, I questioned why his school began classes so early. The local middle school starts at 8:45 a.m., making the transition to high school that much more difficult. In my small community in Southern California's Inland Empire, where many residents had grown up locally and attended the same high school, no one I spoke to could remember a time when the school day hadn't started so early. Some thought it might be because of the buses the district had once used to transport kids, even though high school bus service had been discontinued. It made no sense. When I questioned parents of older kids, they shrugged and acknowledged they were grateful that stage was behind them. But it was apparent some kids were quietly suffering. My son's freshman year, there was a suicide cluster in the district. Meanwhile, on a daily basis, kids were struggling to stay awake and get to school on time. I saw them lining up every morning at the just-opened Starbucks across the street from the school, and I talked to other parents and found out their kids were racking up tardies or quietly pursuing other options, like taking online classes to avoid having a first period. I quickly realized I tapped into something larger than our school or our community. In August 2015, the same month my son started high school, the CDC had released its National School Start Time Survey results, showing that more than 3/4 of the nation's middle and high schools started earlier than the recommended 8:30 a.m. start time. My search for information led me to other parents and communities across the country, and to findings dating back several decades. As I spoke with and met dozens of researchers, educators, and community members, it became apparent that the issue was reaching a critical mass. After many years of careful study, the American Academy of Pediatrics had issued its landmark recommendation in 2014 that middle and high schools shouldn't start before 8:30 a.m., given the relationship between too early start times and teen sleep deprivation and the attendant risks. The CDC concurred with this recommendation when it issued the results of its school start time survey in 2015. Not long after, both the American Medical Association and American Psychological Association announced their support as well. Not only was there a history dating back to the late 1990s of schools around the country that had made the change, there was a body of research documenting a track record of success. When schools shifted to later start times, students got more sleep, performed better, and were even more likely to graduate. But despite the official health recommendations and the supporting evidence, in far too many cases, parents like me were being shut down when they tried to raise the issue. Countless communities were like my own, unwilling to change their legacy schedules despite the overwhelming evidence. As a journalist focused on parenting, education, and public health, I realized I'd found my new subject. In September 2016, the Los Angeles Times published an op-ed I'd written about why schools should start later in the morning. The op-ed not only generated enough responses for the paper to run them the following weekend, it also caught the attention of California State Senator Anthony Portantino, who had a high schooler of his own. In early 2017, he introduced a bill requiring healthy start times for California's middle and high schools. I was quickly swept up in the legislative journey, a multi-year process that led to the first law of its kind in the country. For more information, it is further discussed in Chapter 15. I toggled between my new role as an advocate and my background as a journalist, tracing the story not just to the very first high school to enact later start times, but even further back to the initial research into teen sleep. And I found it all led back to a very unusual camp that had once existed, the Stanford Summer Sleep Camp. The more knowledge I gained, the more I was able to implement changes to help my teens with their sleep, as well as improve my own sleep. In this book, I've distilled down what I learned, culled from interviews with more than 50 researchers and other experts, and from close to 200 studies, reports, books, and other sources. I've organized the content into 3 main sections. Part 1 provides the background and context about sleep and its increased importance during the teen years. You'll learn the story behind the Stanford Summer Sleep Camp and other key developments, as well as the reasons why schools have such early start times. Part 2 delves into how our teen sleep affects so many critical aspects of their lives, including mental health, risky behaviors, school performance, sports, driving, and more. There's also information about sleep disparities and how sex and gender, sexual identity, socioeconomic status, and race and ethnicity factor in. Part 3 focuses on strategies and practical advice for improving your teen's sleep. You'll find recommendations you can implement at home, as well as resources and inspiration for changing school start times. Plus, there's an insider's view of what it took to make the California school start times law a reality, as well as an entire chapter on technology use and sleep. While I was writing this book, the pandemic hit, upending life across the globe and abruptly forcing schools to pivot to online learning. Amid all of the disruption, there was, for many teens, an unexpected silver lining, a chance to sleep in. Not only was their commute to school eliminated, the first class of the day was often pushed back, allowing teens to set their alarms accordingly. It became abundantly clear schools could make the change and could do so quickly. And it was apparent that in our new changed reality, our teens needed, more than ever, the emotional resilience sleep helps provide. Some schools kept these later start times even when in-person school resumed, providing teens with the more sleep-friendly schedules they'd needed all along. And now, with California's new law on the cusp of implementation, more than 3 million teens and preteens in the state will have these schedules too. As of July 1st, 2022, the state's public high schools will start no later than 8:30 a.m. and the middle schools no earlier than 8 a.m. Chapter 15 has more details. It isn't that our teens can't get by on too little sleep. Somehow they do it when they have to, as we all do. But there are significant repercussions, as noted earlier, and which you'll learn more about in this book. On the flip side, well-rested teens are happier and healthier and do better in school. They're more emotionally resilient. And they're easier to live with. We all function better when we're not sleep-deprived. As Dr. Rafael Palaio, a clinical professor at Stanford University's School of Medicine who specializes in treating sleep disorders, summed up in a recent TEDx talk, sleeping is the most powerful and natural form of self-care we have. I hope this book gives you the information and the tools to help your teen attain more and better sleep. You may find it spurs you to re-examine your own sleep habits as well. May the following be a roadmap for the journey. Part 1. The Story of Teen Sleep and Schools. Prologue. The Stanford Summer Sleep Camp. At the time of the Stanford Summer Sleep Camp, Lake Lagunita was still an actual lake. In the warmer months, the lake, a reservoir technically, created by Leland Stanford in the 1870s to irrigate crops, was often a magnet for sunbathing or splashing around. It was located just behind the campers' dorm, but it was off-limits for them because of their electrodes. Joe Oliveira, one of the original campers, recalls that right after check-in, 4 electrodes were glued to his hair, 2 taped next to his eyes, and several more by his chin. The electrodes remained in place the whole time. They had these long cords that came out of them, very small, like for an iPhone charger, he told me. During the day, the cords were often tied back and taped together into a compact bundle at the back of his head. The trodes, as the campers became known because of their electrode ponytails, attracted their fair share of weird looks on their outings around the campus. Anyone observing them would have also noticed something else peculiar. Like clockwork, every 2 hours, they all returned to the dorm for nap tests. In their completely darkened rooms in the dorm, all the campers, a mix of kids and teens, would lie quietly for 20 minutes and attempt to fall asleep. The entire time, technicians in a nearby control room monitored their brain waves, eye movements, and chin muscle activity being transmitted from their electrodes via the cords, which had been plugged into a box near the headboard that had cables linked to a polysomnograph machine in the other room. There, a continuous paper trail issued forth, the jagged pattern mapping the campers' data. When the time was up, the campers were roused and unplugged. The counselors recorded their vital signs, then plugged their wires into a second box, this one closer to the dorm room desk, and ran the campers through a short series of tests designed to measure their recall, attention span, and other aspects of alertness and cognitive functioning, so these could also be assessed in relation to sleepiness. Tom Harvey, who worked as a counselor technician at the camp for several years, recalled a mix of math tests and memory tests and can you suffer through boredom tests. Oliveira remembered the tests more fondly. An example of a typical memory test was being asked to listen to a short story about, say, a gorilla, he explained, where gorilla and because are the key words. If you hear the word gorilla, you tap the left switch, and when you hear the word because, you tap the right switch. And then you tap it as closely as possible to when you heard the word. Then the campers would be unplugged from the machine, their electrodes again tied back into ponytails until it was time for the next nap. Oliveira wasn't just a camper, of course, and the Stanford Summer Sleep Camp wasn't really a camp, even though it was designed to resemble one. The campers were paid subjects for a long-term adolescent study. Each camper was paired with a counselor, who was, in nearly all cases, a Stanford undergrad working under the supervision of Mary Carskadden, who was pursuing her doctorate in neuro and biobehavioral sciences at Stanford. What she found over the course of the camp's 10-year existence profoundly changed our understanding of teen sleep. Carskadden had arrived at Stanford a few years prior to work with William Dement, who in 1970 had founded the nation's first clinic dedicated to sleep disorders. Dr. Dement's influence in sleep science dated back to his own days as a graduate student in the 1950s, as we'll learn in the following chapter. In 1975, she and Dement had what we later called a light bulb moment. As they reviewed the results of several sleep experiments, they realized the amount of time it had taken their subjects to fall asleep was directly related to how sleepy they were. This meant that measuring the amount of time it took to fall asleep was a way to measure their level of sleepiness. As Dement explained in his 1999 book, The Promise of Sleep, this may not seem like an earth-shattering epiphany, but conceiving and developing an objective measure of sleepiness was perhaps one of the most important advances in sleep science. Based on this realization, they created what they called the Multiple Sleep Latency Test, MSLT, to measure how long it takes to fall asleep, which is known as sleep latency. They decided the test should be repeated every 2 hours. To minimize boredom, and presumably to keep people coming back, they decided to cap the amount of time the subjects needed to lie in bed at 20 minutes. The common assumption was kids needed less sleep as they matured. When the clinic received a grant to study sleep in children and teens, an opportunity presented itself for them to deploy the new MSLT measure more broadly. Their goal? To determine how sleep changed over the course of adolescence, based on the common assumption kids needed less sleep as they matured. This was axiomatic. The older you are, the less sleep you need. Carskadden later wrote about their pre-sleep camp mindset. Sleep had primarily been studied at night up until then, with far less attention paid to the impact of being sleepy during the day. We knew we had to study the kids in the summer if we wanted to get a good full picture of their nighttime and daytime sleep, Carskadden told me. But Dement's on-campus lab was too small for a study of the scope they envisioned. They needed to find a new location better suited for conducting the every 2-hour assessments. They settled on the Lambda Nu dorm near the lake and began to prepare. Kim Harvey, one of Carskadden's main assistants during the camp and sister to Tom Harvey, recalled visiting a local elementary school, now shuttered, to talk to the 5th graders about the study and encourage them to sign up. There were also participants like Oliveira, children of Stanford faculty members who in many cases already knew the researchers. Oliveira was close friends with Dement's son and spent countless hours at their house when he was growing up. When he and I spoke, Oliveira recounted one early adventure in which Dement wanted to see if it was possible for kids to stay up all night, in preparation for future studies about the effects of sleep deprivation on sleep latency. We must have been 10 years old, and Dement said, "I want to do this fun weekend. We'll be at our house the entire time, but we're not going to go to sleep at all. Do you think you can do that?" And of course, we said, "Heck yes." We tried to go as long as we could, and we made it to the sun coming up. Then he kept on trying to wake us up, which became highly annoying. Before the campers arrived each summer, Carskadden and her crew of undergraduate assistants first had to transform Lambda Nu, with its secluded setting and corridors of empty dorm rooms, into their field lab. It was quite a production, Carskadden recalled. Using Dement's pickup truck, her crew of undergraduate assistants drove all over campus fetching the equipment they'd need. The sleep disorders clinic needed its polysomnograph machine year-round, but there was one in the animal lab that wasn't used in the summer months, and several others tucked away at other research labs on campus. After they'd piled them all in the bed of the pickup truck to transport them to Lambda Nu, the assistants would help lug them into the building. The stainless steel machines were large and bulky, each one nearly as tall as a refrigerator. And there were stacks of boxes of continuous feed paper for the machines, enough to fill a walk-in closet. While the machines were being installed in the control room, several rooms in the same dorm wing were being readied for the campers. First, the windows had to be completely covered to keep any light from seeping in during the many daytime naps. In the earlier years, this was more of a hassle. Each window had to be meticulously covered with cardboard, which was then duct-taped to the frames. After a few years, the crew switched to contact paper. Then came the task of hooking up all of the monitoring equipment, with cables snaking from the bedside and desk-side consoles out the door and into the nearby control room. And there was another challenge. After being plugged into the bedside consoles, the campers were effectively tethered to their beds. In the absence of video monitors, intercoms, and other now standard monitoring devices, one of Carskadden's technicians designed and built a call button system. For the camper, in the middle of the night, if they needed to get up to use the toilet or something, they would push a button and it would flash a light and ring a little tone in the room where the equipment was, Carskadden explained. A staff member would then go see what the camper needed. It was old school, she said, but it worked really well for us. And with that, the dorm having been converted into a sleep lab, the first wave of campers arrived for the camp's inaugural summer in 1976. Camp life and process. From the start, Carskadden knew the studies needed to be balanced with fun activities, so campers like Olivero would enjoy themselves, and most importantly, keep coming back. That meant volleyball games out back near the shores of the lake, and afternoon strolls to Stanford's now-defunct bowling alley and the Student Union Center. Being out in the sun and getting sweaty meant the electrodes had to be checked regularly to ensure they hadn't come loose. If so, the area would need to be rubbed clean with alcohol before the sensors were reaffixed. Swimming was out of the question, of course, and while the younger campers were content to go without bathing, some of the teenage campers yearned for a shower. If they decided to forego afternoon bowling and use the time for showering, their counselor had to remove the electrodes beforehand and then reapply them post-shower. It had to be coordinated. It wasn't a casual thing, Tom Harvey said. At night, there were movies. Reel-to-reel screenings of films borrowed from Stanford's archive during the camp's early years, and later, movies shown on a new gadget that was just becoming popular, a video cassette recorder. Mary Carskadden had the first VCR I ever saw, Tom Harvey told me. Perhaps the real draw, though, was the one-on-one attention each kid got from their counselor, whose entire role was to focus on that particular camper. They got all that attention from this college student, which I think they really liked, Kim Harvey said. And in fact, making the experience fun for the campers was a key part of the job. Carskadden, ever on the lookout for kids who seemed shy or unhappy, might point someone out and ask the counselors to lavish a specific camper with a little more attention, Tom Harvey recalled. Or if the kid's energy was flagging, she might ask two counselors to stage a jello-eating contest as lunchtime entertainment. With the frequent naps and tests occupying so much of the day, the goal was to make the remaining pockets of time as enjoyable as possible. At scheduled intervals throughout the day, the counselors also had to remember to administer questionnaires to assess how tired the campers felt. Screwing up put holes in the data, Tom Harvey said. You couldn't go back and say, "Fill this in, we forgot to do that before." It made a lot of statistical extra work for Mary when people would miss questionnaires. Each day began with Carskadden counting down until the exact time for the counselors, clipboards in hand, to enter the kids' rooms to rouse them and record their temperature and pulse. After a quick series of tests and a questionnaire, it was time for breakfast. Then back to the rooms for a morning nap period. Again, they'd be plugged into the headboard monitors while the technicians in the control room observed their brainwave patterns for the next 20 minutes. If the kids fell asleep, the counselors would quickly reappear to wake them, And if not, the campers would lie in the darkened room until the 20 minutes were up and the counselors reappeared to untether them from their headboards. You had to watch them like a hawk.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?